Tonight we climb. Not the kind of climb where you hop in a cable car and sip hot chocolate at the top, but the kind where your thighs burn, your lungs gasp for thin air, and a voice in your head, your own voice, not a monk's, quietly suggests this was a terrible idea. You're somewhere in the Himalayan foothills, on a path that doesn't so much switch back as it does insult your fitness level with every steep, uneven step. Below you, the world you know has already disappeared, swallowed by distance and the growing realization that you are now utterly, completely committed. Ahead, carved into the mountainside like a stubborn thought you can't shake, sits a 14th-century Tibetan monastery. Its whitewashed walls glow faintly in the fading light. And from this far away, it looks less like a building and more like a geological feature that decided to sprout windows. You're not entirely sure if you're a pilgrim, a seeker, or just someone who took a wrong turn at the last village and was too stubborn to turn back. Probably a bit of all three. The air here does something strange to your perception. Each breath feels like a negotiation, a conscious effort to pull oxygen from a sky that seems to hoard it jealously. The wind, when it picks up, doesn't just blow. It whines through the rocks with a sound so lonely it makes you check over your shoulder for something that might be listening. And the rocks themselves are everywhere, not just underfoot but piled into makeshift cairns along the trail. Each one a silent prayer from someone who came before you, someone who likely made this same miserable climb and thought, you know what would make this better? Stacking stones. You pass one such cairn, a precarious tower of flat grey slabs, and resist the urge to give it a little nudge, partly out of respect and partly because you're too exhausted to bend over and pick up a rock if it falls. The path narrows until it's barely a ledge, and you press yourself against the cool stone wall, acutely aware of the drop to your right that disappears into a twilight haze. A string of prayer flags, faded to pastels by sun and snow, snaps violently in the wind, their fabric cracking like tiny whips. The mantras printed on them, you've been told, are carried by the wind to bless the surrounding land, which seems like a very efficient system until you realize the wind is also trying very hard to bless you right off the edge of this mountain. You take a breath, hold it, and shuffle past. It's in moments like these that you fully appreciate the comfort of a modern hotel with its firm handrails and liability waivers. You probably won't survive this, or at least that's what the dramatic part of your brain keeps whispering. But the more practical part notes that if previous monks made this trek hauling bricks and barley flour, you can probably manage it with just a small backpack and an overwhelming sense of regret. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. As you near the top, the terrain shifts. The path widens again, leveling out onto a plateau that feels less like a natural formation and more like a gesture of mercy from the mountain itself. And there it is, finally close enough to see in detail, the monastery. It's not a single building but a cluster of structures clinging to the slope, their flat roofs and outward slanting walls giving them the appearance of giant stone boxes stacked by a careless hand. Wooden balconies jut out here and there, and from one of them, a single flicker of but a lamplight catches your eye before disappearing again, as if the building just winked at you. The main temple rises above the rest, its copper-gold roof catching the last rays of the sun and throwing them back at the darkening sky like a final, defiant hello. You stand there for a moment, catching your breath and letting the reality of it settle in. This place is old. Older than your country. Older than most things you've ever touched. The stones beneath your feet have been worn smooth not by machines, but by centuries of sandals, bare feet, and probably the occasional disgruntled yak. You're not just arriving somewhere. You're stepping into a current of time that has flowed uninterrupted since an era when knights in Europe were still figuring out chainmail and the Black Death was just a terrifying thought in some flea's future. The wind dies down for a moment, and in the sudden, profound silence, you hear it. a low, resonant hum that seems to vibrate not in your ears, but in your chest. It's the sound of the monastery breathing. And it's waiting for you. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You cross the threshold from the rocky plateau into the monastery's courtyard, and the wind dies as if someone closed a door behind you. The sudden stillness feels almost aggressive, a silence so complete it rings in your ears like its own kind of sound. The courtyard is a rough square of packed earth, swept so clean that every individual stone and straw stands out in sharp relief against the hard-packed ground. Surrounding you on three sides are the monastery walls, their whitewash aged to the color of old bone, punctuated by dark wooden doors and small, deep-set windows that stare back at you like unblinking eyes. A few scruffy chickens peck at nothing in the corner, their movements jerky and mechanical, utterly unimpressed by your arrival. You had imagined something more dramatic, perhaps a solemn greeting, a ceremonial bell. But instead, you get chickens and the distinct feeling that you are being watched by every window simultaneously. To your left, a young monk in burgundy robes scurries across the courtyard with an armload of kindling, his shaved head catching the last light. He doesn't acknowledge you, too focused on not dropping his bundle, and you watch him disappear through a low doorway. This is the first thing you learn about monastic life. It is, above all things, mundane. These men aren't floating in meditation 24 hours a day. They have to eat, they have to stay warm, and someone has to carry the firewood. The romance of the place, the spiritual mystique you carried up the mountain with you, begins to rub against the gritty reality of chickens and chores, and for a moment you feel a little foolish for expecting anything else. In the center of the courtyard stands a large, square stone pillar draped with more prayer flags, these ones newer than the tattered remnants on the trail, their colors still bright: white, red, green, yellow, blue. They hang limply in the windless air, waiting. At the base of the pillar, a small brass bowl holds the remnants of what looks like roasted barley flour, sampa, the staple food of the Himalayas. An offering, you realize, left for whatever hungry spirits might pass through. Or maybe just for the chickens, who seem to have noticed it too but haven't worked up the courage to approach. You wonder if that counts as a loophole, feeding the birds while technically feeding the gods. A door creaks open somewhere above you, and you look up to see a monk leaning over a wooden balcony, emptying a bucket with a casual splash that arcs down into a corner of the courtyard you now resolve never to walk through. He sees you watching, offers the faintest nod, and disappears back inside. So much for the ceremonial welcome. You've clearly arrived at a time when the monastery is simply living. There's something reassuring about it. Actually, if this place were too pristine, too perfectly spiritual, you'd feel like an intruder in a museum. Instead, you feel like someone who just showed up at a relative's house during the least convenient hour. And there's a strange comfort in that awkwardness. The architecture around you tells its own story, and you take a moment to read it. The walls aren't perfectly straight. They slope inward slightly as they rise, a traditional design that gives the buildings a solid, almost squat appearance, like they are bracing themselves against the mountain's constant attempts to shake them loose. The wooden beams supporting the upper floors are dark with age, their ends carved into simple, stylized shapes, a lotus here, a cloud there, that have been softened by centuries of weather into something almost abstract. You run your fingers along one of them, and the wood feels more like stone, petrified by time into a hardness that resists your touch. A dog, one of those shaggy Tibetan mastiff types, lifts its head from where it's been sleeping in a patch of fading sunlight near the main temple door. It eyes you with the weary suspicion of something that has seen too many strangers and learned that none of them bring treats. You hold its gaze for a moment, then look away first, which feels like the correct protocol. The dog huffs once, a sound of profound judgment, and lays its head back down. You've been assessed and found wanting. Fair enough. Historians still argue whether monasteries like this one were built in such remote locations purely for spiritual isolation or if there was a healthy dose of self-preservation involved. The 14th century was not a kind time for Tibet. Caught between competing Mongol factions and the rise of new political powers. A monastery tucked into a mountainside was harder to raid, harder to tax, harder to even find if you weren't looking for it. The same cliffs that nearly killed you on the way up would have stopped an army cold. So yes, the monks came here to seek enlightenment, but they also came here to hide. And somewhere in those weathered walls you can feel that dual purpose. A place of both soaring prayer and practical paranoia. The sun has now fully set, and the courtyard darkens rapidly, the way mountains do when they decide day is over. Someone lights a butter lamp in a window across from you, and the flame flickers weakly against the growing dark. You're still standing there, uncertain of what comes next, when a door opens directly ahead, the main entrance to the temple. A monk stands there, older than the others you've seen, his face a roadmap of wrinkles and quiet authority. He doesn't smile, but he doesn't frown either. He simply looks at you, then gestures with one hand toward the open door. No words, just an invitation. And from somewhere inside, that low hum you heard on the trail seeps out again, wrapping around you like a sound you can feel in your teeth. The chanting has begun. You step toward the open door, drawn by that low hum that seems to bypass your ears entirely and settle somewhere in your sternum. The sound is unlike anything you've heard before. Not a melody, not really a rhythm, but something more fundamental, like the planet itself decided to groan in its sleep. The old monk steps aside to let you pass, and you enter a narrow corridor that smells of butter lamps, old wood, and something else, something sharp and sweet that you can't identify. Incense, probably, but not the clean, simple sticks you've burned in your own home. This is thicker, almost edible, coating your tongue with every breath. The corridor opens suddenly into a space that makes you stop walking without deciding to. It's the main assembly hall, and it's bigger than the outside of the building suggested was possible. Wooden pillars rise into darkness above, their tops lost in shadow, and between them sit row after row of low wooden benches covered with cushions in faded burgundy. The walls are painted. No, not painted, they are covered, absolutely covered, in murals that glow with their own inner light thanks to the dozens of butter lamps flickering on small altars throughout the room. You see Buddhas seated in meditation, their faces serene and slightly terrifying in their stillness. You see wrathful deities with multiple heads and arms, dancing on demons, their expressions fierce enough to make you look away. You see mandalas so intricate they seem to move in the lamplight, patterns within patterns within patterns. And you see the monks. They sit cross-legged on the benches in neat rows, perhaps 40 or 50 of them, their burgundy robes pooled around them like spilled wine. Most have their eyes closed, but a few glance up as you enter, their faces unreadable, before returning their attention to whatever is happening inside their own minds. The hum continues, and you realize now that it's coming from them, a collective drone produced by every monk in the room, their voices blended into a single, massive tone that fills the hall like water fills a bowl. It's not loud. Exactly. It's more that the sound has weight, presence, and it presses against you from all sides at once. The old monk who let you in gestures toward a corner near the back, where a small stack of cushions suggests a place for visitors. You make your way there, trying to be as quiet as possible, which is absurd because the chanting would drown out a small avalanche. You settle onto a cushion that's harder than it looks, cross your legs in a way that feels awkward and wrong, and just listen. The chant itself has no words you can distinguish, or at least none you recognize. It's built on a single syllable, or maybe a few syllables, repeated over and over with slight variations in pitch and intensity. You think you hear that universal seed sound you've encountered in yoga classes and meditation apps. But there's something else mixed in. A guttural edge that makes the sound rougher, more physical. The monks aren't just singing, they're vibrating. Their entire bodies engaged in the production of this sound. You watch one monk closely and see his throat working in ways that seem anatomically questionable, producing a low fundamental tone while simultaneously generating a higher harmonic that whistles through the drone like wind through rocks. This is the famous throat singing you've heard about, the multiphonic vocal technique that allows a single person to produce 2 or 3 notes at once. But hearing it on a recording and experiencing it in person are 2 entirely different things. In person, it's not just sound, it's physics. The overtones seem to move through the air independently, circling the room, bouncing off walls, finding you no matter where you try to hide. You close your eyes and the sound becomes visual, patterns of light behind your eyelids that shift with every harmonic shift. Open them again and the room feels different. The murals somehow brighter, the butter lamps burning with a fiercer flame. A lesser-known detail about this style of chanting is that it wasn't originally developed for performances or recordings. It was a practical solution to an architectural problem. These assembly halls, built of thick stone with high ceilings and no amplification, would swallow normal voices whole. A single speaking voice, or even a conventionally sung prayer, would simply vanish into the rafters, unheard by anyone beyond the first few rows. But this low, harmonic-rich sound, produced with maximum volume and minimum effort, carries. It projects. It fills the space. The monks discovered, probably through centuries of trial and error, that certain vocal techniques could make a single voice audible to everyone in the hall, and that 40 voices doing the same thing could create something that felt less like sound and more like weather. You open your eyes and let your gaze wander the room. The monks seem almost hypnotized by their own voices, their bodies swaying slightly, their faces slack with concentration. A few of the younger ones, novices probably, have their eyes open and darting, watching the older monks for cues, learning by osmosis how to shape this sound. One of them catches you watching and quickly looks away, his concentration visibly cracking for a moment before he steadies himself and returns to the drone. You feel like you've intruded on something private, even though you were invited. This chanting isn't a performance. It's not for you. It's for them. For the Buddhas on the walls. For the empty space where enlightenment might someday sit. You're just a witness, allowed to observe but not to participate. And that realization shifts something in how you listen. The chant continues without apparent beginning or end. There's no verse and chorus here, no structure you can grasp, just the endless repetition of the same sounds, cycling like the prayer wheels you saw outside, each repetition wearing away a little more of something, distraction, maybe, or self, or time itself. You feel your own mind trying to latch onto the sound, follow it, predict it, and failing. The sound refuses to be predictable. It just is. And after a while, you stop trying to understand it and simply let it be present, let it fill you the way it fills the hall. The monks chant on, their voices blending into that single massive drone, and you sit in your corner, barely breathing, listening to the sound that defines these stones. The chant eventually subsides, not with a grand finale but with a gradual thinning, like fog burning off under a morning sun. One by one, the monks let their voices drop away until only a handful of the oldest among them remain, their low tones holding the space for a few final moments before they too fall silent. The silence that follows feels heavier than the sound that preceded it, a physical weight pressing down on the hall. You realize you've been holding your breath and let it out slowly, careful not to disturb the hush. The monks begin to stir, unfolding their legs and rising from their cushions with the quiet efficiency of people who have done this 10,000 times before. A few glance your way, but most don't, their attention turned inward or toward the door where a meal or sleep or simply the next moment of their endless routine awaits. The old monk who admitted you reappears at your elbow, and you startle slightly. You didn't hear him approach. He gestures for you to follow, and you rise on legs that have fallen asleep during your vigil, pins and needles dancing through your feet as you hobble after him. He leads you out of the assembly hall and through a different door, one you hadn't noticed before, into a smaller chamber that seems to serve as a combination of storage room and informal gathering space. Piles of cushions stack in one corner, their fabric worn shiny with use. A low table holds a collection of brass butter lamps in various states of repair. And against one wall, a small shrine holds a single statue of a seated Buddha, its face lit by a single flame that burns in a silver bowl. The monk settles onto a cushion and gestures for you to do the same. Up close, you can see details you missed in the dimmer light of the hall. The deep lines around his eyes, the missing tooth that appears when he almost smiles, the way his hands rest in his lap with a stillness that seems practiced rather than natural. He doesn't speak, just looks at you with an expression that manages to be both welcoming and deeply skeptical. You realize after a long moment that he's waiting for you to say something, to explain why you're here, what you want. And you realize with equal clarity that you don't have an answer. You came because the path led here, because the sound pulled you, because something in your life felt incomplete and this seemed like a place where completeness might be found. But putting that into words feels impossible. So you just sit there, returning his gaze, hoping that's enough. After what feels like a very long time, he nods, as if your silence was exactly the response he expected. He reaches behind him and produces a small wooden cup, then fills it from a copper kettle that's been warming near a butter lamp. He hands you the cup and you take it, the ceramic warm against your palms. It's butter tea. You realize as you bring it to your lips. Salty, greasy, and utterly unlike any tea you've ever tasted. The first sip is a shock, your mouth expecting something familiar and receiving instead a warm slap of salt and fat. The second sip is easier. By the third, you understand why people in this climate drink this. It's not tea, it's fuel, calories, and warmth in liquid form. Exactly what a body needs when the air is thin and the nights are cold. The monk watches you drink with what might be approval. Then, in a voice that surprises you with its roughness, you expected something mellifluous after hearing him chant, but his speaking voice is gravel and wind. He asks, "Why do we chant the same words, over and over, for hours?" It's not really a question, you realize. It's a test. He wants to hear what you've already guessed, what you might have learned in your short time here. You think about the sound that filled the hall, the way it seemed to exist independently of the voices producing it, the way it pressed against your skin and settled into your bones. Because it works, you say, surprising yourself with the answer. Because saying something once is just information. Saying it 1,000 times makes it true. He almost smiles again, that missing tooth making a brief appearance. "That is one answer," he says. "There are others. You will stay and learn them." It's not an invitation. It's a statement of fact. You nod. Because what else can you do? You came here seeking something, and apparently you found it. Or it's found you. The tea is gone, the cup empty in your hands, and the monk rises with a fluid grace that belies his apparent age. He takes the cup from you and sets it aside, then gestures toward the door you came through. "Rest now," he says. "Tomorrow, you begin." You leave the small chamber and find yourself back in the corridor near the assembly hall. The monastery has grown quiet around you. The monks disperse to their cells or to evening tasks. Through a window, you see stars beginning to appear in the mountain sky, sharper and brighter than any stars you've ever seen, as if the thin air lets them shine more clearly. You find your way back to the courtyard, now empty of chickens and dogs, and notice for the first time a small door you missed earlier, slightly ajar, with a dim light glowing inside. You push it open and find a tiny cell, a wooden platform for sleeping, a single cushion, a small window looking out onto darkness. Someone has left a butter lamp burning on a small shelf, and a folded blanket sits on the sleeping platform. Your room, apparently. You sit on the platform and feel the day catch up with you all at once. The climb, the sound, the tea, the strange acceptance of your presence here. Outside, the wind has picked up again, moaning around the corners of the building. But inside this small cell, you're warm and sheltered and utterly, completely present. You blow out the lamp and lie back in the darkness. And the last thing you hear before sleep takes you is that low hum, still echoing somewhere in your chest, the sound of the monastery breathing you into its rhythm. You wake to darkness so complete it feels solid, pressing against your eyes like a blindfold. For a long moment you have no idea where you are. The thin air, the hardness beneath you, the complete absence of city noise all conspire to disorient you completely. Then memory returns in fragments. The climb, the chanting, the old monk and his butter tea. You're in the monastery, in a cell barely larger than your body, and somewhere beyond these stone walls the sun is probably rising, though you'd never know it from the absolute blackness surrounding you. A sound reaches you through the dark. Not the chanting this time, but a single bell, struck once, its tone hanging in the air long after the strike fades. Then another bell. Then a third. The monks are being called to morning prayers, and apparently so are you. You fumble in the dark for the door, find it, and step out into a corridor lit by a single butter lamp flickering at the far end. Other doors are opening, other figures emerging, monks in their burgundy robes, moving with the quiet purpose of people who have done this every morning for years, decades, centuries. You follow them, not needing to know the way because the flow of bodies carries you forward. Through the corridor, across the courtyard where the stars still blaze overhead, and back into the assembly hall you visited last night. The butter lamps have been freshly lit, their flames multiplied by reflections in the brass offering bowls until the whole room seems to flicker with 1,000 tiny suns. The monks take their places on the cushions, and you find your spot in the corner, the same cushion you used before, as if it's been waiting for you all night. The chanting begins again, but this time you listen differently. Last night you were overwhelmed by the sound itself, its sheer physical presence. Now, with the memory of the old monk's question still fresh, why repeat the same words over and over? You try to hear the structure beneath the surface. And slowly, as your ears adjust and your mind settles, you begin to perceive what your untrained hearing missed before. This isn't random droning. There's a system here, a precise and deliberate architecture of sound. The chant is built on a single fundamental tone, low and constant, that serves as the foundation for everything else. Most of the monks produce this tone, their voices locked together in a unison so perfect it becomes a single voice, massive and immovable. But woven through that foundation, other voices create patterns, higher harmonics that whistle and keen, rhythmic variations that pulse through the drone like heartbeats, and occasional shifts in the fundamental pitch itself, subtle but unmistakable, that change the entire color of the sound. You realize after a while that the chant is following a structure, a kind of sonic mandala that unfolds in time rather than space. The syllables themselves, when you can distinguish them, seem to be Tibetan transliterations of Sanskrit, the ancient language of Indian Buddhism, preserved in these mountain chants long after it ceased to be spoken anywhere else. Om Mani Padme Hum. You hear at one point, the most famous of all Buddhist mantras, its 6 syllables stretching and compressing across the drone. Om Hum. You hear at another point, a triple syllable that seems to mark transitions in the chant, and other syllables, stranger ones, sounds that have no meaning you can recognize but that clearly carry significance for the monks producing them. A widely accepted historical fact about this tradition is that the specific techniques used in Tibetan Buddhist chanting were codified over centuries and preserved through rigorous oral transmission. Young monks don't learn to chant from books. There are no musical scores, no written notations. They learn by sitting next to older monks, by imitating, by being corrected again and again until their throats produce exactly the right sound. The training can take decades, and even then, only a few monks master the full range of techniques. What you're hearing this morning is the accumulated knowledge of generations, passed from throat to throat in an unbroken chain stretching back to the 14th century and beyond. You watch the monk nearest you, a middle-aged man with a shaved head and a scar across his cheek. His eyes are closed, his face relaxed, but his throat is working in ways that seem almost supernatural. You can see the muscles of his neck contracting and releasing in complex patterns, his jaw shifting slightly with each breath cycle, his entire upper body engaged in the production of this sound. Every few minutes, he takes a breath so subtle you almost miss it, and then resumes the chant exactly where he left off, as if the sound never stopped. This is not singing as you've understood it. This is a form of yoga, a physical discipline that transforms the body into an instrument. Between the syllables, in the spaces where the sound thins almost to silence, you hear something else. The breath of 40 monks, synchronized without apparent effort, inhaling and exhaling together as if they share a single pair of lungs. The rhythm of their breathing becomes part of the chant, a substructure beneath the substructure, and you find your own breath trying to match it, failing, trying again. Your mind, which wandered during last night's session, stays focused this morning, held in place by the sheer complexity of what you're hearing. There's too much to notice, too much to process, for distraction to find a foothold. The chant continues for what feels like both minutes and hours. Time in this hall doesn't behave normally. It stretches and compresses, loops back on itself, refuses to move in a straight line. When the monks finally fall silent, you have no idea how long you've been sitting there. It could have been 30 minutes. It could have been 3 hours. The butter lamps have burned lower, their flames smaller, but that's the only clue. The old monk catches your eye from across the hall and gives that almost smile again. And you realize he's been watching you watch them, assessing your attention, your focus, your growing understanding. You pass whatever test he was running, because he nods once and then turns away, leaving you alone with the echo of the chant and the slowly dawning realization that you've only begun to scratch the surface of this sound. After the morning chanting, the monks file out of the assembly hall with the same quiet efficiency they entered, and you find yourself alone with the fading resonance and the flickering butter lamps. Your legs are stiff, your back protests the hours of sitting on a hard cushion, and yet you feel strangely alert, more awake than you have any right to be after what was likely a very short night. The sound is still with you, not as memory but as presence, a low hum that seems to have taken up residence somewhere behind your sternum. You press your hand against your chest and feel it, a vibration that has nothing to do with your heartbeat. The chant has entered you, and you're not entirely sure it plans to leave. You make your way to the courtyard, where the morning sun has finally crested the surrounding peaks and turned the whitewashed walls to gold. Monks sit in small groups, some talking quietly, others simply sitting in silence, their faces turned toward the warmth. A few tend to chores, sweeping, carrying water, feeding the chickens that have reappeared from wherever they spent the night. You spot the monk with the scarred cheek from this morning and approach him, unsure of what you're going to say but compelled by a question that's been forming since last night. Why? Why this endless repetition? These same syllables chanted for hours, days, lifetimes? What does it accomplish? He looks up as you approach and, to your surprise, gestures for you to sit beside him. His English, when he speaks, is halting but clear, learned perhaps from previous visitors or during a stay in one of the Tibetan refugee communities in India. You want to know about the chanting, he says. It's not a question. You nod anyway. He considers for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the mountains across the valley, then begins to speak. The mind is like water, he says. Always moving, always changing, always finding new places to flow. This is good for some things, for survival, for learning, for adapting to new situations. But for seeing clearly, for understanding what is real and what is only temporary, it is not good. Moving water cannot show you your own face. Only still water can reflect clearly. He pauses, letting you absorb this, then continues. The chanting is how we still the water, not by stopping thought. That is impossible. Thought cannot be stopped any more than wind can be stopped. But by giving the mind one thing, only one thing, to hold on to. The sound, the syllable, the same sound over and over, until the mind stops looking for something new and simply rests in what is. You think about your own mind, its constant chatter, its endless search for stimulation, its refusal to stay with anything for more than a few seconds. The idea of training that mind to rest in a single syllable for hours seems absurd, impossible. And yet you've just witnessed 40 monks doing exactly that. Their faces calm, their bodies still, their attention utterly absorbed by the sound they were producing. If it's impossible, someone forgot to tell them. The repetition, the monk continues, is not for the sound's sake. The sound is just a tool. The repetition is for the mind's sake. Each time you return to the syllable, you strengthen something, a habit of attention, a capacity for focus. Think of it like building a muscle. You do not lift a rock once and become strong. You lift it many times, every day, for years. Then you are strong. The chanting is the same. You repeat the mantra 10,000 times, 100,000 times, 1,000,000 times, and eventually your mind becomes strong enough to hold it without effort. And in that strength, something else becomes possible. He falls silent, and you wait, knowing there's more. After a long pause, he turns to look at you directly, his eyes dark and depthless in the morning light. The purpose of the chant is not the chant. The purpose is what the chant reveals when the chant stops. When the mind has been stilled by repetition, when the water is clear, then you can see what has always been there, waiting to be seen. Your own nature, the nature of reality, the face you had before you were born. He smiles slightly, but that is for later. First, you must learn to hold the syllable. You sit with this for a while, watching the monks go about their morning routines, feeling the sun warm your face. The idea that repetition could lead to revelation, that doing the same thing over and over could open a door rather than close one, is foreign to your way of thinking. Your culture values novelty, change, constant movement. The idea of staying with one thing long enough to exhaust its surface and reach its depths feels almost like a kind of death. But sitting here, in this ancient courtyard, with the memory of the chant still vibrating in your chest, it doesn't feel like death. It feels like something else entirely. A lesser-known detail about this tradition is that the specific mantras used in chanting are believed to be more than just sounds with meaning. They are considered to be actual embodiments of enlightened qualities, compressed into sonic form. The syllable Om, for example, isn't just a representation of the universe, it's the universe present in the sound itself. To chant Om is to invoke and become, momentarily, the totality of existence. This isn't symbolism. It's closer to what you might call magic, if you were inclined to use that word. The monks aren't praying to something outside themselves. They are using sound to transform themselves into what they are praying to. You think about this as you watch a young novice walk past, his lips moving silently, practicing his mantras even as he carries water across the courtyard. For him, the repetition never stops. It's not confined to the assembly hall. It's a constant background hum, a rhythm that underlies every moment of waking life and probably continues into sleep. The chant becomes his mind, or his mind becomes the chant. Either way, the boundary between them dissolves. The scarred monk rises, his sitting finished, his teaching apparently complete for now. He looks down at you with an expression you can't quite read. "You will come to the afternoon session," he says. "It is longer. You will see what repetition does when repetition has nowhere left to go." He walks away, leaving you alone with your thoughts and the growing realization that you've stumbled into something far deeper than you anticipated. You came here curious about a sound. You're leaving, for now, still curious about the sound, but also beginning to understand that the sound is just the surface. Beneath it, there's an ocean. The afternoon session arrives faster than you expect, the mountain light shifting from gold to something harsher as the sun arcs overhead. You've spent the intervening hours wandering the monastery's edges, exploring small chapels you missed before, watching monks at their daily tasks, and trying, mostly failing, to still your own mind with the simple repetition of Om the way the scarred monk suggested. Your attempts last maybe 30 seconds before thoughts intrude. What's for dinner? How long until sunset? Whether anyone back home has noticed you're gone. The mind, you're learning, is not eager to be stilled. It fights back with everything it has. You return to the assembly hall as the monks are gathering, finding your usual spot in the corner. But something feels different this time. The butter lamps seem to burn with a fiercer flame. The murals on the walls appear more vivid, and the air itself feels charged, expectant. The old monk who first admitted you enters last, taking a seat at the front of the hall on a slightly raised cushion that marks him as someone important. The abbot, maybe, or the chant master. He catches your eye for a moment, and you feel seen in a way that's both uncomfortable and oddly reassuring. Then he closes his eyes, and the chanting begins. It starts slowly, the way it always does, with a single low tone from one of the oldest monks, joined one by the others until the hall fills with that familiar drone. But this time the drone deepens, drops lower, becomes something almost subsonic that you feel in your gut rather than hear with your ears. The higher harmonics that usually weave through the sound are absent at first, stripped away until only the fundamental remains, a tone so low and pure it seems to come from the earth itself, from the stone beneath your cushion, from the bones of the mountain. And then, slowly, the harmonics return, but differently than before. They stack and layer in ways that seem to create new tones between the tones, chords that shouldn't exist coming from voices that should only be able to produce one note at a time. You realize after a while that you're hearing something extraordinary. The monks are using a technique that allows them to produce multiple distinct pitches simultaneously, their throats shaped into configurations that split the airflow and create overtones so clear they sound like separate instruments. This is the famous multiphonic chanting you've read about, the sound that made Tibetan Buddhism famous among ethnomusicologists and casual listeners alike. But reading about it and hearing it are worlds apart. Reading about it tells you it's possible. Hearing it makes you question everything you thought you knew about the human voice. Historians still argue whether this unique style of chanting was a deliberate discovery or an accidental byproduct of other practices. Some point to the influence of older shamanic traditions in the region, where throat singing was used to imitate natural sounds and communicate with spirits. Others argue that it developed organically within the monasteries themselves, a natural result of men chanting together for hours in resonant stone spaces, their voices unconsciously adjusting to create the richest possible sound. A few scholars suggest it might have been taught by Indian Buddhist masters who visited Tibet in the early centuries of the tradition, bringing with them knowledge of Sanskrit phonetic techniques that included overtone production. The debate continues, with no clear resolution in sight, and the monks themselves don't seem particularly interested in settling it. For them, the question isn't where the technique came from. The question is what it's for. And what it's for, you're beginning to understand, is power. Not power over others, but power over reality itself, or at least over the perception of reality. The multiphonic chant creates a sound that has no single source, no location you can point to and say it comes from there. It seems to emanate from everywhere at once, from the walls, from the air, from inside your own head. This disorients the ordinary mind, the mind that wants to locate and categorize and control. It opens a gap, a space between thoughts, and in that space, something else can appear. You watch the monks' faces as they produce this impossible sound, and you see no strain, no effort. Their expressions are calm, almost bored, as if producing multiple notes simultaneously is no more difficult than breathing. Which, for them, it might be. Decades of practice have made this technique second nature, as automatic as walking or blinking. They are not thinking about the harmonics. They are just chanting, and the harmonics happen. A lesser-known detail about this practice is that the specific overtones produced aren't random. They are carefully controlled to create particular sequences and patterns that correspond to the structure of the mantra being chanted. A skilled chant master can produce a rising series of overtones that exactly mirrors the syllables of a text, embedding the words within the sound in a way that's audible only to those trained to hear it. It's a form of sonic encryption, a way of hiding meaning in plain hearing. You listen more closely, trying to detect these hidden patterns, and for a moment you think you hear something, a whistle that seems to shape itself into a syllable, a harmonic that dips and rises like speech. Then it's gone, lost in the greater sound, and you're left wondering if you imagined it. The chant continues, building in complexity, and you feel yourself being drawn into it in a new way. Earlier sessions were interesting, even moving, but you remained an observer, separate from the sound. Now the sound is pulling you, inviting you to become part of it. Your breath begins to sync with the monk's breath. Your heart rate slows to match the pulse of the chant, and without deciding to, you find your lips moving, forming syllables you don't know, producing sounds you've never made before. You're not chanting, exactly. You don't have the training, the technique, the years of practice. But you're participating, finally, in whatever this is. And it feels like coming home to a place you've never been. The old monk at the front opens his eyes and looks directly at you. He doesn't smile, doesn't nod, doesn't give any sign of approval or disapproval. He simply looks, and in his look you read something you can't quite name. Acknowledgement, maybe, recognition. As if he's been waiting for this moment, for you to cross whatever line separates hearing from listening, observing from participating. Then he closes his eyes again, and the chant deepens, and you're lost in it, finally and completely lost, in the best possible way. The chant ends, and you come back to yourself slowly, like rising from deep water. The hall is dimmer than when you entered, the butter lamps burning low, their flames tiny and desperate. Hours have passed. You know this without checking, without needing to confirm. The afternoon session was longer, just as the scarred monk promised, and you've been sitting here, held by the sound, for what must have been 4 or 5 hours at least. Your body protests as you try to move, joints screaming, muscles cramped. But beneath the physical discomfort is something else, something that feels almost like elation. You've touched something, glimpsed something, and even though you can't name it, can't describe it, you know it was real. The monks file out slowly this time, their own bodies clearly feeling the effects of the long session. A few glance your way with expressions that seem almost envious. You, the newcomer, the visitor, given this experience without earning it, without the years of preparation they endured. But most simply ignore you, too focused on their own internal states to worry about yours. You sit for a long time after they've gone, not meditating exactly, just sitting, letting the silence resettle around you. Then, finally, you rise and make your way back to your cell. The cell feels different tonight. Smaller, yes, and still just as hard and cold as before, but also somehow more yours, more inhabited. You lie on the sleeping platform and stare at the ceiling you can't see in the darkness, and the chant is still there, still humming in your bones, still present in a way that feels permanent. You press your hands against your ears and hear it anyway, internal rather than external, a sound your own body has learned to produce. Maybe this is what the monks mean by transformation, not becoming someone new, but becoming someone who carries the sound with them always, who can access it whenever they need it, who no longer depends on external conditions for internal peace. Sleep comes slowly, fitfully. You drift in and out, your mind replaying fragments of the chant, images from the murals, the old monk's face with its almost smile. At some point you surface fully, your eyes open in the darkness, and you realize you're not alone. Someone is sitting in the corner of your cell, cross-legged, watching you. You can't see them, the darkness is too complete, but you know they are there, can feel their presence like a pressure in the air. Your heart rate spikes, your breath catches, every survival instinct screaming at you to run or fight. But you don't move. You can't move. You're pinned by the darkness, by the presence, by something that feels less like danger and more like attention. Then the presence speaks, and it's the old monk's voice, rough as gravel, calm as stone. You felt it today, he says. Not a question. The sound entered you. You became part of it. You try to respond, but your voice won't work, your throat locked with fear, or both. He continues as if you had answered. This is the beginning, or it could be the end. Many feel what you felt and then stop, thinking they have arrived. They have not arrived. They have only opened the door. What comes next is harder. You manage to force words out, your voice a croak in the darkness. What comes next? Silence for a long moment. You feel him shift, though you can't see it. You must learn to hold the sound when the sound is not there. You must learn to chant without chanting. You must become the mantra itself, not just a voice repeating it. This takes years. This takes lifetimes. This takes everything you have and everything you thought you were. Another silence, longer this time. Or you can leave tomorrow, go back down the mountain, and remember this as a strange dream. Many do. There is no shame in it. You lie there, absorbing this, your heart still pounding but slowly calming. The presence in the corner doesn't feel threatening anymore, just present, attentive, waiting. You think about your life before this climb, before this monastery, before this sound. You think about the noise and speed and constant distraction, the way your mind never stopped moving, never rested, never stilled. You think about how you felt today, in that hall, held by the sound, part of something larger than yourself. And you know, with a certainty that surprises you, that you can't go back. Not yet. Not without trying to understand what happened, what's still happening, what might happen if you stay. I'll stay, you whisper into the darkness. At least for now. At least to see. The presence doesn't respond verbally, but you feel something shift. Approval, maybe, or simply acknowledgement. Then you hear the faint rustle of robes, the soft sound of bare feet on stone, and you know you're alone again. You lie there, breathing slowly, listening to your own heartbeat, and gradually, the chant returns. Not in your ears this time, but in your chest, your throat, your bones. You're producing it somehow, or it's producing itself through you, and you let it happen, let it fill you, let it carry you down into sleep. The last thing you're aware of before unconsciousness takes you is the sound, still there, still humming, still waiting. It will be there when you wake. You know this now. It will always be there. Historians still argue whether the experience of becoming the sound reported by meditation practitioners is a genuine transformation of consciousness or simply a trick of the mind, a dissociative state induced by prolonged focus. The debate mirrors larger questions about the nature of religious experience itself, whether it reveals something real about reality or only something real about the human brain. The monks, of course, have their own answer, and it's not one that fits neatly into either category. For them, the question isn't whether the experience is real in some objective sense. The question is what it allows you to do, what it allows you to see, what it allows you to become. And on that measure, they would say, the evidence is overwhelming. Generations of practitioners have used this technique to achieve states of insight and compassion that transformed not only their own lives but the lives of everyone around them. If it's a trick, it's a very useful one. You wake before dawn to the sound of that single bell, its tone cutting through the darkness like a knife through butter. Your body protests every movement as you sit up. The hard platform has done nothing for your back, and the cold has settled into your joints overnight. But beneath the physical complaints, that hum is still there, still present, still waiting. You've been carrying it all night. You realize. It never left. You slept inside the sound, and now you're waking inside it, and the boundary between you and it has blurred even further. You make your way to the assembly hall through corridors lit by a few brave butter lamps, following the flow of monks who move with the same quiet purpose as yesterday. But today something has shifted in how you see them. Yesterday they were fascinating subjects, objects of curiosity, performers of an ancient art. Today they are fellow travelers, companions on a journey you've barely begun to understand. You take your usual spot, but it doesn't feel like your spot anymore. It feels like a place you earned, a place that accepted you during yesterday's long session. The monk with the scarred cheek nods at you as you settle in, a small gesture but significant. You've been noticed. You've been acknowledged. You're no longer entirely invisible. The morning chant begins, and you listen differently now. Not for the surface sound, not for the technique, but for what lies beneath. The intention, the purpose, the reason this practice has survived for centuries in this harsh and beautiful place. And as you listen, you begin to understand something that yesterday was only a hint. The discomfort is the point. The cold, the hard cushions, the hours of sitting, the physical demands of the chanting itself. None of this is accidental. It's all designed to create a specific kind of experience, a specific relationship between body and mind. You notice how the cold sharpens your attention, how the discomfort keeps you from drifting into drowsiness, how the physical demands of producing sound force you to stay present in your body even as your mind reaches for something beyond it. The monks aren't suffering through these conditions despite their practice. They are using them. The discomfort is a tool, as important as the mantra, as important as the breath. It keeps you honest. It keeps you here. It prevents the kind of floaty dissociation that passes for spirituality in softer traditions. A widely accepted historical fact about Buddhist monasticism is that it was never intended to be comfortable. The original monks, following the example of the Buddha himself, embraced poverty, simplicity, and physical hardship as essential elements of the path. Comfort leads to attachment, attachment leads to suffering, and suffering leads away from liberation. So you sit on hard cushions in cold halls and you chant until your throat aches and your back screams. And in that discomfort you find something that comfort could never provide: clarity. The mind, stripped of pleasant distractions, has nowhere to hide. It must face itself directly. You think about this as the chant continues, your own body protesting less now that you've stopped fighting the protest. The cold is just cold. The hardness is just hardness. The ache is just ache. None of it is personal. None of it is happening to you. It's just happening, and you're here for it, present with it, not pushing it away. This shift in perspective, subtle but profound, changes everything. The discomfort doesn't disappear, but it stops mattering in the same way. It becomes part of the practice rather than an obstacle to it. The monk beside you, an older man with a face like weathered rock, catches your eye and gives the tiniest nod. He noticed your shift, your moment of understanding. He's been where you are, probably decades ago, and he recognizes the look. You nod back, and for a moment you're connected, teacher and student across a gap of years and experience, but sharing this one thing: the knowledge that discomfort, properly used, becomes a door. The chant deepens, and you let yourself fall into it completely. The sound carries you, holds you, becomes you. Your body still hurts. That hasn't changed, but the hurt is just sensation now, information rather than suffering. You're cold, but the cold is just temperature. You're tired, but the tiredness is just a signal from a body that needs rest eventually. None of it is you. None of it defines you. You're the one noticing the cold, the tiredness, the ache. You're the awareness in which all of this appears. And that awareness, you're beginning to suspect, is what the chanting is really about. A lesser-known detail about traditional monastic training is that novices are often subjected to intentionally difficult conditions as a test of their commitment. They might be given the coldest cells, the longest chores, the least desirable seats in the assembly hall. This isn't punishment, it's education. They are learning, through direct experience, that comfort is not the goal. They are learning to find equanimity in any condition. They are learning that the mind can be free regardless of what the body is experiencing. And they are learning that the chant, the sound, the practice, can be accessed anywhere, anytime, no matter how uncomfortable the circumstances. You think about your own life, your own constant pursuit of comfort, the softest bed, the warmest room, the most convenient arrangement of circumstances. You've spent your whole life trying to arrange conditions so that you could be happy. And somehow happiness always remained just out of reach, always dependent on the next improvement, the next upgrade. Sitting here, cold and aching, chanting a sound you don't fully understand, you're happier than you've been in years. Not because the conditions are good, they're objectively terrible, but because you've stopped fighting them. You've stopped needing them to be different. You've accepted what is. And in that acceptance, something has relaxed, something has opened, something has become possible that wasn't possible before. The chant continues, and you continue with it, body aching, mind clear, heart strangely full. The monks around you chant on, their faces calm, their voices steady, and you know they've learned this lesson long ago. They are not enduring the discomfort. They are using it. And now, finally, so are you. The morning chant ends, but instead of the usual drift toward the courtyard and its morning tasks, the monks remain seated. A ripple of anticipation moves through the hall, barely visible but unmistakable. Shoulders straighten, eyes focus, attention sharpens. You glance at the scarred monk beside you, questioning, and he gestures with his chin toward the front of the hall where the old abbot is rising from his cushion. Without a word, he moves toward a door you haven't noticed before, set into the wall behind the main shrine. The monks follow, rising in unison and filing through the door in order of apparent seniority, the oldest first, the youngest last. You hesitate, unsure if this is for you, but the scarred monk takes your elbow and gently propels you forward. You're going wherever they're going. The door opens onto a narrow staircase cut directly into the stone, descending rather than ascending, the steps worn smooth by centuries of feet. Butter lamps set into niches in the wall provide just enough light to see the next step, no more. The air grows colder as you descend, and damper, and you become aware of a smell you can't quite identify. Old silk, maybe, or dried flowers, or something else entirely. The staircase opens into a chamber larger than you expected, circular, with a high domed ceiling that disappears into shadow. In the center of the chamber, a single large butter lamp burns on a low table, and around the table, cushions have been arranged in a circle. The monks take their places, and you're guided to a spot between the scarred monk and the wall. This is the debate chamber. You realize. You've heard about these spaces, secret rooms where monks engage in a practice that looks nothing like the peaceful meditation you've witnessed so far. Philosophical debate, they call it, but that gentle term doesn't prepare you for what's about to happen. The old abbot takes a seat at the head of the circle, and two younger monks rise and move to the center, one sitting, one standing. The standing monk draws himself up, and then, without warning, shouts. It's not words, exactly. More like a bark, a sharp explosive sound that cuts through the silence like a blade. He follows it with a gesture, his right hand swinging in an arc to slap his left palm with a crack that echoes off the stone walls. Then the words come, rapid fire, aggressive, demanding. What is the nature of mind? Is it found in the body? Is it found outside the body? Is it both? Is it neither? The seated monk responds calmly, his voice steady, but the standing monk cuts him off with another shout, another slap, another volley of questions. This isn't discussion. This is combat. Historians still argue whether this dramatic debating style originated as a memory aid, the physical movements helping to encode philosophical arguments in the body, or as a deliberate provocation designed to test a monk's equanimity under pressure. Probably both, you think, watching the standing monk hammer his opponent with questions while the seated monk maintains his calm, answering each challenge with patience and precision. The physicality of it is startling after the stillness of the chanting. These monks aren't just thinking about philosophy. They are living it, embodying it, testing it against the force of another mind determined to find its weaknesses. The debate continues. The questions growing more complex, the answers more subtle. You understand almost none of it. The language is Tibetan, dense with philosophical terminology, but the energy is unmistakable. These two are engaged in something that matters deeply to both of them, something that could take years to master, something that will shape how they understand everything. The seated monk makes a point that seems to land, and the standing monk pauses, considers, then nods. The tension breaks. They bow to each other and return to their places, and two new monks rise to take their turn. The scarred monk leans toward you and whispers, his voice barely audible over the next debate. This is why we chant. The chanting stills the mind so it can think clearly. Without the stillness, the debates become arguments, ego fighting ego. With the stillness, they become something else, a search for truth, conducted in public, tested by fire. You nod, understanding dawning. The chanting and the debating aren't separate practices. They are two sides of the same coin, stillness and activity, concentration and investigation, the calm center and the storm that reveals its strength. A lesser-known detail about these monastic debates is that they follow strict logical forms derived from ancient Indian Buddhist philosophy. The standing monk isn't just shouting random questions, he's constructing a formal argument, with thesis, reason, and example, all presented in a specific structure that must be acknowledged by the responder. The slaps and shouts are dramatic, but the content is rigorous, as precise as any mathematical proof. Monks train for years to master these forms, memorizing entire libraries of philosophical texts and learning to deploy their contents in real-time verbal combat. It's like watching a chess match played with words and bodies instead of pieces. The debates continue for hours, the pairs rotating through, the questions ranging across topics you can only guess at: consciousness and its objects, cause and effect, the nature of self, the possibility of liberation. Through it all, the old abbot watches, occasionally interjecting a word that sends one debater back to rethink his position or confirms another's insight. The energy in the room shifts and flows, now intense, now relaxed, now sharp with disagreement, now soft with agreement. You've never seen anything like it. You've never imagined that philosophy could be like this: alive, embodied, public, passionate. At some point, you realize you're gripping your cushion, leaning forward, completely absorbed. You don't understand the words, but you understand the intensity, the commitment, the refusal to let anything slide by unexamined. These monks are not content with easy answers or received wisdom. They are testing everything, questioning everything, demanding that their understanding be real enough to withstand the hardest challenge another mind can throw at it. And the chanting, you now see, is what makes this possible. Without that foundation of stillness, the debates would be just noise, just conflict, just ego. With it, they become something else entirely. A shared search for truth, conducted with rigor and respect, pushing each participant toward clarity they couldn't reach alone. The final pair finishes, bows, returns to their places. The old abbot rises and speaks briefly, his voice quiet but somehow filling the circular chamber. The monks listen, nod, then rise and begin the climb back up the narrow staircase. You follow, your mind spinning with what you've witnessed, your body tired but your spirit somehow energized. Back in the main hall, the butter lamps have been relit, the afternoon light streaming through high windows you hadn't noticed before. The monks disperse to their tasks, and you're left standing alone, staring at the empty space where the debates happened, wondering how you'll ever fit what you've seen into your understanding of what a spiritual life can be. The debates leave you rattled in the best possible way, your mind buzzing with questions you can't even formulate properly. You wander the monastery's corridors and courtyards for the rest of the day, watching the monks at their tasks with new eyes. The young novice sweeping the courtyard. Is he mentally rehearsing philosophical arguments while he works? The middle-aged monk carrying water from the spring. Is he chanting under his breath, maintaining that foundation of stillness even as his body labors? The old abbot, sitting alone in a patch of afternoon sun. Is he reviewing the day's debates, planning tomorrow's teachings, or simply resting in the awareness that all of this practice is meant to reveal? You find yourself outside a small building you haven't explored yet, set apart from the main complex, its walls less weathered than the others. Through an open window, you hear voices, not chanting, not debating, but something in between. Young voices, high and uncertain, repeating syllables under the patient correction of an older monk. You peer through the window and see a classroom of sorts, half a dozen novice monks, none older than 12 or 13, sitting in a circle around a chant master. He's demonstrating something with his throat, producing a low tone and then slowly, painstakingly, shaping it until a harmonic emerges, a high, clear whistle that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The novices try to imitate him, and mostly fail, their throats producing rough sounds that bear little resemblance to the master's pure tone. But he's patient, endlessly patient, correcting each one in turn, demonstrating again, waiting for the inevitable moment when something clicks and a novice produces his first true overtone. You watch, fascinated, as the real work of the monastery reveals itself. The chanting you've heard, so effortless and powerful, isn't a gift. It's not something these monks were born with. It's the result of years of this, daily practice, patient correction, endless repetition. The novices in this room will spend years learning to produce the sounds correctly, and then more years learning to produce them effortlessly, and then more years learning to produce them with the specific qualities required for different rituals and texts. By the time they are old enough to participate fully in the monastery's chanting, they'll have spent thousands of hours in rooms like this, under teachers like this, working on sounds most people never learn to make at all. A widely accepted historical fact about Tibetan monastic education is that it was, and in many places still is, extraordinarily demanding. Young monks begin their training early, often as young as 5 or 6, and their days are filled with memorization, practice, and study. They learn to read and write classical Tibetan. They memorize vast quantities of scripture. They study philosophy and logic, and they train in the complex arts of ritual performance, including chanting. By the time they are fully ordained, they carry in their minds and bodies a body of knowledge that would fill multiple graduate degrees. And they carry it not as information stored in books or computers, but as living capability, ready to be deployed at a moment's notice. The chant master notices you at the window and gestures for you to enter. You slip through the door and sit at the edge of the circle, trying to be invisible. The novices glance at you with curiosity but quickly return their attention to the master, who's now explaining something about diet. You listen, and what you hear surprises you. The monks' voices, it turns out, are shaped not just by practice but by what they eat and drink. Certain foods are avoided because they are believed to harm the voice. Spicy things, overly cold things, things that create excess phlegm or dryness. Other foods are emphasized: warming foods, nourishing foods, foods that support the kind of deep, resonant production that multiphonic chanting requires. Tea is drunk warm, never hot, never cold. Water is sipped, not gulped. The body is treated as an instrument, and like any instrument, it requires careful maintenance. A lesser-known detail about this training is that it includes specific physical exercises designed to strengthen the throat and abdominal muscles used in chanting. The novices demonstrate some of these for you. Strange movements, almost like yoga postures but focused on the neck and torso, combined with breathing patterns that seem designed to build stamina and control. One novice lies on his back with a small stone balanced on his stomach, practicing breathing deeply enough to raise the stone without dislodging it. Another sits with his spine perfectly straight, chanting a single note for as long as his breath holds, then pausing, then repeating. A third practices the overtone technique against a wall, listening for the echo to confirm whether he's producing the harmonic correctly. It's athletic training, really, as demanding as any sport, requiring the same kind of dedication and repetition. The master calls each novice forward individually to demonstrate their progress. Most are still at the beginning stages, their overtones rough and inconsistent, their fundamentals wavering. But one boy, maybe 10 years old, produces a harmonic so clear it makes you catch your breath. The master nods, almost smiles, and sends him back to his place with a word of encouragement. This one, you think, will go far. This one has the gift, or has developed the skill, or both. The others watch him with a mixture of admiration and determination, and you see in their faces the same competitive spirit that animated the debate chamber. Not hostile, not ego-driven, but real nonetheless. They want to improve. They want to master this. They want to be the one the master nods at someday. You stay for the rest of the lesson, watching these young monks take their first steps on a path that will consume their lives. Some of them will leave, you know. Monastic life isn't for everyone, and the dropout rate among novices is high. But some will stay, will persist through years of practice and correction and failure and slow improvement, will eventually become the chant masters teaching the next generation. The tradition continues because of them, because of this room, because of the patient work of people who understand that some things can't be rushed, can't be shortcut, can't be learned any way except slowly, carefully, over time. The lesson ends. The novices bow to their master and file out, chattering now in the relaxed way of children anywhere. The master turns to you, his face unreadable. You watched, he says. What did you see? You think for a moment, then answer honestly. I saw that nothing comes from nothing. The sound I heard in the hall, the chanting that seemed to come from nowhere, it comes from here, from this room, from years of this. He nods slowly, then gestures toward the door. Come back tomorrow. Watch again. You will see something different each time. You thank him and leave, stepping out into the late afternoon light, the sound of novice voices still echoing in your mind. You return to the assembly hall that evening for another session, your body more accustomed now to the routine, your mind more prepared for what's coming. The monks file in, take their places, and the chant begins. That familiar low drone, those emerging harmonics, that sense of being held by something larger than yourself. But tonight something is different. Tonight your mind refuses to settle. Thoughts race through you like panicked animals. Memories of home, worries about the future, questions about whether any of this is real, whether you're fooling yourself, whether the monks are fooling you. You try to return to the sound, to let it carry you. But every time you think you've found your footing, another thought yanks you away. This has happened before, of course, in your limited meditation attempts back home. But those were 10-minute sessions in a comfortable room, easily abandoned when your mind wouldn't cooperate. This is different. You're surrounded by monks who've been sitting for hours, who show no signs of distraction, whose minds seem as still as mountain lakes. And you're here, in their space, supposed to be participating, and your mind is a chaos of noise. The contrast couldn't be starker, and the shame of it, the embarrassment, the sense of failure, only generates more thoughts, more distraction, more noise. The scarred monk beside you must sense your struggle, because without opening his eyes or pausing his chant, he reaches over and places a hand on your knee for just a moment. A touch, nothing more, but it's enough. In that touch, you feel something, permission, maybe, or acknowledgement, or simply companionship. You're not alone in this. He's been here too, probably thousands of times, struggling with the same wandering mind, the same inability to settle. The difference isn't that he's perfected his attention. The difference is that he's learned to accept the wandering and return, again and again, without judgment, without shame, without giving up. You take a breath and try again. The chant is still there, still present, still waiting. You let your attention rest on it, and for a moment it holds. Then a thought arises. What will you eat after this? And you're gone again. But this time, instead of spiraling into frustration, you simply notice the thought, note it, and return to the sound. Another thought. Is that monk across the hall staring at you? And you're gone again. Notice, note, return. Again and again, 100 times, 1,000 times, the same cycle. Distraction, awareness, return. Distraction, awareness, return. And slowly, imperceptibly, something shifts. Historians still argue whether the traditional Buddhist understanding of distraction as a demon to be conquered is meant literally or metaphorically. Some texts describe armies of Mara, the Buddhist equivalent of a tempter figure, attacking meditators with thoughts of desire, aversion, and doubt. Other texts treat distraction more psychologically, as a natural function of an untrained mind. Either way, the remedy is the same. Relentless, patient return to the object of attention. The demon is not defeated by fighting it, but by refusing to engage with it. You let it come. You let it be. You let it go. And eventually, exhausted by your lack of response, it stops coming. You're not there yet. Not even close. But you're beginning to understand the process, and that understanding changes something. The thoughts still come, but they matter less. They are just weather, passing through a sky that remains unchanged. The sound is still there, the chant still present, and you're still here, sitting, breathing, returning. The monks around you continue their unwavering drone, and you realize they are not unaffected by distraction. They've just learned to relate to it differently. Their minds wander too, probably, even after decades of practice. The difference is that they don't make it mean anything. They don't turn it into a story about failure or inadequacy. They just notice, and return, and continue. A lesser-known detail about traditional monastic practice is that monks are explicitly trained to handle distraction with this kind of gentle, persistent return. They are taught that the mind is like a wild elephant, and meditation is the process of gradually taming it, not by beating it into submission, but by patiently, consistently, leading it back to the same spot. The elephant will wander. That's what elephants do. The trainer's job isn't to prevent wandering, but to notice when it happens and gently guide the elephant back. Over time, the wandering becomes less frequent, less prolonged. But it never stops entirely. Even enlightened beings, the texts say, experience thoughts. They just don't believe them. You hold on to this as the session continues, letting it soften your frustration. The thoughts keep coming. A memory of a conversation from years ago, a worry about something you said yesterday, a fantasy about telling someone back home about this experience. But each time, you return. And each return feels less like failure and more like practice. This is what practice is. You realize. Not perfect attention, but endless returning. Not a mind free of thought, but a mind that knows how to relate to thought without being controlled by it. The monks aren't here because they've achieved some superhuman state of concentration. They are here because they show up, day after day, and do the work of returning. And that, finally, is something you can do too. The chant continues, and you continue with it, your mind still wandering but your heart somehow quieter. The demon of distraction hasn't been defeated. It's still here, still active, still trying to pull you away. But you're not fighting it anymore. You're just noticing it, and returning, and letting the sound hold you. And in that simple shift, everything changes. Not dramatically, not permanently, but enough. Enough to get through this session. Enough to show up for the next one. Enough to begin, finally, to understand what the monks have been trying to teach you all along. The session ends, and you open your eyes to find the scarred monk watching you with something like approval. He doesn't speak. Words would break the spell. But he nods, just once, and you nod back. You're learning. Slowly, imperfectly, but learning. The demon will be back tomorrow, and the next day, and probably for the rest of your life. But you'll be back too. And that, apparently, is enough. Days pass, or maybe weeks. Time has become slippery in this place where each day is essentially identical to the one before. You wake to the bell, you chant, you eat, you wander, you watch the novices practice, you sit in on debates you barely understand, you chant again, you sleep. The routine has become familiar, almost comfortable, though your body still protests the hard cushions and the cold and the hours of sitting. But beneath the physical discomfort, something else is growing. A stillness, a quietness, a capacity to simply be present that you didn't have before. The chant is always there now, even when you're not in the hall. You carry it with you, a constant companion, a background hum that never quite fades. One morning, the routine shifts. The bell rings as usual. But instead of gathering in the main assembly hall, the monks gather in the courtyard, their faces more solemn than you've seen before. The old abbot speaks briefly, his words too quiet for you to hear. And then the monks begin to move, filing out of the monastery's main gate and onto the mountain path. You follow, unsure what's happening but certain you want to be part of it. The path leads upward this time, away from the valley, toward a ridge you've noticed but never explored. The climb is steep, your lungs burning in the thin air, but the monks move steadily, their pace unhurried but relentless. After an hour or so, the path levels onto a small plateau, and you see your destination. A chorten, a stupa, a dome-shaped structure of whitewashed stone topped with a golden spire. It's smaller than the ones you've seen in photos from Kathmandu or Lhasa, but somehow more powerful, more present, more real. Around its base, prayer flags snap in the wind, their colors bright against the gray stone. And arranged in a semicircle facing the chorten, cushions have been placed, enough for all the monks who made the climb. They settle onto them without hesitation, and you find a spot at the edge, your legs grateful for the rest. This is a rite for the dead, you realize as the chanting begins. Not a funeral exactly, no body present, no family in evidence, but a ritual nonetheless, a ceremony designed to guide a consciousness through the journey that follows death. Someone has died, somewhere, and the monks have come here to chant for them, to offer the sound as a guide, a protection, a companion on the road ahead. The chant is different from the ones you've heard before. Slower, more drawn out, each syllable given space to resonate before the next one begins. The harmonics are still there, but softer, more gentle, as if the sound itself is trying not to startle whatever it's meant to guide. You listen, and something in you opens. The chant seems to reach beyond the plateau, beyond the mountains, beyond the world entirely, into a space you can't see but can somehow feel. The monks aren't just making sound, they are building a bridge, creating a pathway, offering a connection between this world and whatever comes next. The texts say that consciousness after death is confused, frightened, easily lost. The chant provides a reference point, a familiar sound, something to hold on to when everything familiar has fallen away. The syllables aren't just words. They are landmarks, signposts, points of orientation in a landscape that has none. A widely accepted historical fact about Tibetan Buddhism is its elaborate attention to the process of dying and what follows. The Bardo Thodol, often called the Tibetan Book of the Dead, is perhaps the best-known example. A guide for the dying and their attendants, describing in detail the visions and experiences that arise after death and offering instructions for navigating them. But the texts are only part of it. The rituals, the chants, the visualizations, all of these are technologies for dying, tools to help consciousness make its way through the bardos, the intermediate states between death and rebirth. And at the center of many of these rituals is sound, the power of the human voice to reach across the ultimate divide. A lesser-known detail about these death rituals is that they are often performed not just for the recently deceased but for anyone who has died in the past, regardless of how long ago. The monks might be chanting today for someone who died last week, or last year, or a century ago. In the Buddhist view, time isn't linear in the way we usually think. Past, present, and future coexist in ways that make later intervention possible. A chant performed now can reach a consciousness that died long ago, can offer guidance and support across what we think of as an unbridgeable gap. This isn't superstition to the monks. It's physics, or metaphysics, or simply the way things are. You think about people you've lost, people whose deaths still echo in your life. You think about the sound reaching them, somehow, across years and miles and the ultimate separation. You think about the possibility that your being here, listening to this chant, is part of that reaching, that your attention, your presence, your intention is adding something to the ritual, strengthening the bridge, helping the sound find its way. It sounds absurd when you put it into words, but sitting here, on this plateau, with the wind and the flags and the monks' voices filling the air, it doesn't feel absurd. It feels true. The chant continues for hours, the sun moving across the sky, the shadows lengthening and shifting. The monks show no signs of fatigue, their voices steady, their attention unwavering. You stay with them, your own attention more stable now than it would have been weeks ago, held by the sound and the place and the purpose. At some point, you find yourself crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, just tears streaming down your face for reasons you can't quite name. Grief? Maybe. For people you've lost and will lose. Gratitude? Maybe. For this moment, this sound, this chance to be part of something so much larger than yourself. Or maybe just the release that comes when something true is spoken, even if it's spoken in a language you don't understand, for a purpose you can only dimly grasp. The chant ends as the sun touches the western peaks, the final syllables hanging in the air long after the voices fall silent. The monks sit for a long moment, eyes closed, faces calm. Then, one by one, they rise and begin the descent back to the monastery. You rise too, your body stiff but your heart somehow lighter. The path down is easier than the climb up, and you follow the monks in silence, the sound of the chant still resonating in your chest. You don't know whose death this ritual was for. You don't know if it worked, if the consciousness it was meant to guide found its way. But you know something else, that for a few hours, on a plateau above the world, you were part of something real. And that will stay with you, whatever happens next. The day after the death ritual, the monastery feels different, quieter, more inward, as if everyone is processing something too large for words. You move through your usual routine, but everything seems muffled, distant, like watching the world through a veil. The chanting sessions continue. The debates continue. The novices practice their overtones in the small building set apart from the main complex. But there's a hollowness to it all, an absence you can't quite name. Something is missing, or someone, or maybe it's just you, still carrying the echo of that plateau, still wondering about the consciousness the monks tried to guide. On the third day after the ritual, a stranger arrives. You see him from across the courtyard, a figure in tattered robes, his hair long and matted, his face weathered beyond any age you can guess. He carries nothing but a staff and a small bundle, and he moves with the slow, deliberate pace of someone who has walked a very long way and isn't in any hurry to arrive. The monks greet him with respect, bowing slightly, and the old abbot comes out to meet him personally. They speak briefly, then the stranger is led inside, and you don't see him again until evening. That night, the assembly hall is fuller than you've ever seen it. Monks who usually stay in their cells have come out for this session, and the cushions are packed tight, barely room to sit. The stranger sits at the front, next to the abbot, and you study him in the butter lamplight. His face is a map of lines, each one telling a story you'll never know. His eyes are bright, almost startlingly so. The eyes of someone who has seen things and processed them and come out the other side. His hands rest in his lap with a stillness that makes the monk's stillness look like fidgeting. This is a yogi, you realize, a wandering practitioner, someone who has left the monastery behind to pursue solitary practice in caves and hermitages, returning only occasionally to share what is learned. The chanting begins, and it's different from any you've heard before. The monks chant as they always do, their voices blending into that massive drone. But the yogi's voice cuts through it like a blade. Not louder, exactly, but clearer, more present, more focused. When he chants, the sound seems to come from somewhere beyond his body, somewhere beyond a hall, somewhere beyond the world entirely. The harmonics he produces are so pure they hurt to hear, like staring at the sun. And beneath the sound, you feel something else, a presence, an intention, a quality of attention that transforms everything it touches. After the session, the yogi stays in the hall, and a small group gathers around him. The senior monks, the abbot, a few others. You hang back, unsure if you're welcome, but the scarred monk gestures you forward, and you find a spot at the edge of the circle. The yogi speaks in a low voice, his words in Tibetan but occasionally translated by the abbot for your benefit. He's been in a cave high in the mountains, he says, for 3 years, practicing alone, with only occasional visits from a local villager who brought food. During that time, he chanted continuously, not aloud, not with his physical voice, but internally, silently, the mantra repeating itself in his mind without pause, without effort, without end. Historians still argue whether the practices of solitary hermits like this yogi represent the purest form of Buddhist meditation or a dangerous departure from the communal tradition. Some point to the Buddha's own example. He left his teachers and practiced alone for years before his enlightenment, as justification for solitary practice. Others note that the Buddha also founded a community and spent most of his life teaching within it, suggesting that solitude and community are complementary rather than opposed. The debate continues, and will probably continue forever, because both sides have truth in them. The yogi in front of you embodies one side of that debate, and his presence here, in this community, suggests he understands the value of the other side as well. A lesser-known detail about these solitary practitioners is that they often develop extraordinary abilities through their practice. Not magical powers, necessarily, but capacities of attention and presence that seem almost supernatural to those who haven't developed them. The yogi demonstrates one of these for you now. He closes his eyes, and after a moment, He begins to chant, but this time, his voice produces 2 distinct pitches simultaneously, then 3, then 4, a chord that shouldn't be possible from a single human throat. The harmonics stack and layer until the sound seems to come from a dozen voices rather than one. And through it all, his face remains perfectly calm, his body completely still, as if producing this impossible sound requires no more effort than breathing. You watch, transfixed, and something in you shifts. The chanting you've heard in the monastery has been powerful, transformative even. But this is something else entirely. This is the sound not as practice but as result, not as path but as destination. The yogi has become the chant in a way that the monks, for all their dedication, are still becoming. He's not producing the sound, he is the sound, and the sound is him. And the distinction between producer and produced has dissolved completely. This is what the old monk meant, you realize, when he talked about becoming the mantra itself. This is what's possible when the practice goes all the way. The yogi finishes, and the silence that follows is the most complete silence you've ever experienced. No one moves, no one speaks, no one even seems to breathe. The butter lamps flicker, casting shadows that dance across the murals. And for a moment the painted deities seem almost alive, almost present, almost ready to step down from the walls and join the circle. Then the yogi opens his eyes, looks directly at you, and smiles. It's not the almost smile of the old monk, not the nod of the scarred monk, but a real smile, full and warm and completely disarming. In that smile, you feel seen in a way you've never been seen before. Not judged, not evaluated, not measured, just seen. Accepted. Welcomed into whatever this is. The gathering breaks up slowly, the monks returning to their cells, the yogi disappearing with the abbot into some private chamber. You sit alone in the hall for a long time, the memory of that sound still resonating, that smile still warming something in your chest. You came to this monastery curious about chanting. You've learned about technique and purpose and community and ritual. But tonight, for the first time, you've glimpsed what the chanting is for. Not just to still the mind, not just to guide the dead, not just to debate philosophy, but to become something. To transform. To realize, in the most direct way possible, that the sound and the one who makes it are not 2 different things. And that, you now understand, is the whole point. The yogi leaves the next morning, disappearing down the mountain path as quietly as he arrived. You watch him go from the courtyard, his tattered robes fading into the grey dawn light, and you feel something between loss and longing. A part of you wants to follow him, to find your own cave, to chase that sound into the silence where it was born. But another part knows your path lies elsewhere, at least for now. You came to this monastery as a visitor, a seeker, a curious traveler. You're leaving, and you know now that you will leave, that your time here is drawing to a close, as something else. Not a monk, not a practitioner, not even really a student, but someone who has heard something, felt something, been touched by something that won't let go. The days that follow have a quality of farewell to them. Though no one says anything about your departure, you attend the chanting sessions with a new attention, trying to memorize the sound, to fix it in your memory so you can carry it with you. You sit in on the novices' practice, watching their slow progress with a tenderness you didn't have before. You wander the monastery's corridors and courtyards, letting each detail imprint itself. The way light falls through a certain window in the afternoon, the smell of butter lamps and old wood, the sound of wind through prayer flags. You're saying goodbye, though you haven't said it aloud. On your last evening, the old abbot summons you to his quarters. You've never been inside this part of the monastery before, and you enter with a mixture of curiosity and reverence. His room is simple. A cushion, a small altar, a few texts wrapped in silk. But the view from his window is extraordinary. The entire valley spread out below, the peaks beyond catching the last light. He gestures for you to sit. And you do, waiting in silence for whatever he has to say. You came here seeking something, he says finally, his voice soft but clear. Have you found it? You think about this for a long moment, turning the question over in your mind. Have you found what you were seeking? You're not sure you ever knew what you were seeking. You came because the path led here, because the sound pulled you, because something in your life felt incomplete. And now, after weeks in this place, you're leaving with something you didn't have before. Is that finding? Is that enough? I don't know, you answer honestly. But I'm leaving with more than I came with. The abbot nods, as if this was exactly the answer he expected. That is enough, he says. That is more than enough. Most people leave with less. He pauses, then reaches behind him and produces a small object. A mala, a string of 108 beads, worn smooth by years of use. He holds it out to you, and you take it, feeling the weight of it in your palm, the warmth of the wood, the spaces between the beads where fingers have rubbed them again and again. This was given to me by my teacher, he says. Now I give it to you. Not because you are ready. You are not ready. Not because you have earned it. You have not earned it. But because the sound you have heard here, the sound you now carry with you, needs something to hold on to in the world you are returning to. Let these beads be that. Let them remind you that the chant continues, even when you cannot hear it. Let them call you back, if you ever need to come. You close your fingers around the mala, feeling the truth of his words settle into you. You will need this. You will need reminding. A widely accepted historical fact about malas is that they are used for counting recitations, keeping track of how many times a mantra has been repeated. A full mala is 108 beads, a number with multiple significances in Buddhist tradition. The 108 defilements, the 108 earthly desires, the 108 names of various deities. But the abbot's gift isn't about counting. It's about continuity, about connection, about the unbroken chain of teachers and students stretching back centuries. When you hold this mala, you're holding all of them. Every monk who ever chanted in this hall, every novice who ever struggled to produce an overtone, every yogi who ever sat alone in a cave and let the sound consume them. You're part of that chain now, however tenuously, however temporarily. A lesser-known detail about parting gifts in this tradition is that they are often given not as rewards but as responsibilities. The abbot isn't giving you something to keep. He's giving you something to carry. The mala comes with an obligation. To remember what you've learned, to practice what you've glimpsed, to let the sound continue working in you even when you're far from this place. You may fail at that obligation. Most people do, the abbot's eyes seem to say. But the failure is yours, not the gift's. The mala will still be a mala, still carry the prayers of everyone who touched it, still wait patiently for you to return to it. The question is whether you will. You sit with the abbot for a while longer, not speaking, just being present in the fading light. Then he rises, and you know the audience is over. You bow, as you've seen the monks bow to him, and he places a hand on your head for just a moment. A blessing, a farewell, a sending forth. You leave his quarters and walk through the monastery one last time, the mala clutched in your hand, the chant still humming in your chest. Tomorrow you'll descend the mountain, return to the world of noise and speed and constant distraction. But tonight, you're still here, still held by this place, still part of this sound. You lie in your cell for the last time, the darkness complete around you, the cold seeping through the walls. And in the silence, you hear it. The chant, still there, still present, still waiting. Not coming from the assembly hall this time. Not coming from anywhere outside you. Coming from within. Coming from the place where weeks of listening have lodged it. Where it will stay now. However long you live, wherever you go. The monks have finished their evening session, have returned to their cells, are probably sleeping or meditating or simply resting. But the chant continues, because it always continues, because it's not something they do but something they are. And now, in some small way, something you are too. Tomorrow you'll leave. But tonight, you listen. And the sound carries you down into sleep, as it has every night since you arrived, as it will every night for the rest of your life, whether you know it or not. As you prepare to leave the monastery, the morning light spills across the courtyard in long golden streaks, warming the stones that have held you for these weeks. The mala hangs around your neck now, a weight and a comfort, a promise and a reminder. The monks go about their morning tasks, sweeping, carrying water, feeding the chickens, as if you were never here, as if your presence changed nothing. And maybe it didn't, for them. But for you, everything has changed. The path down the mountain lies ahead, steep and treacherous, the same path that brought you here. But you're not the same person who climbed it. You carry the sound now, the rhythm of the chant, the pulse of this place. It will fade, probably, as all experiences fade, blurred by time and distance and the relentless noise of ordinary life. But it will never disappear entirely. It will surface in unexpected moments. A quiet evening, a chant silence, a moment of stillness you didn't plan. And when it does, you'll be back here, in this courtyard, in this hall, in this sound. The monastery will hold you, even from half a world away. The chant will continue, because you continue. And that, finally, is enough. So as you take your first steps down the mountain, let the sound carry you. Let it be your companion on the long road back to the world. Let it remind you of what's possible, what's real, what's waiting whenever you need to return. The monks will still be here, chanting their endless cycles, holding the sound for everyone who needs it. And you'll be out there, in the noise and the speed and the distraction, carrying a little piece of it with you. That's the gift. That's the practice. That's the journey, finally coming full circle. Ending where it began, with a sound that never really stops. Now, as you settle into sleep tonight, let that sound be with you. Let it carry you down into the quiet darkness, where all sounds eventually fade, where all journeys eventually end, where all seekers eventually find what they didn't know they were looking for. The chant is over, but it's never really over. It's just waiting, patiently, for you to return to it. And you will. We all do. Eventually.